Welcome back to Psych Substance. In today's episode, I'm going to be reading a user experience report from Arrowhead. And in this series, what I like to do is read the story and break down what they did right, what they did wrong, how they could have better implemented safety protocol. And yeah, you guys know the series, so let's jump right into this.
Before we continue, just a quick message from this video's sponsor, which is me. We still are offering these awesome trip blankets. We got some new stock in. These things are the hooded trip blankets. Now what I've done is I've created these awesome glove mitten parts that actually double with a button as pockets so you can store all of your stuff in there. And these things are basically marketed as being super freaking soft. And I'm telling the truth, these things are crazy soft because they're designed by trippers for trippers. So head on over to psychsubstance.shop and pick up your very own cozy trip blanket today.
I'd like to point out that I am reading this story for the very first time. Cody brought me this story, so I have no idea what to expect. This is a story called This Is Fine on Arrowhead. Let's start. So, at this time in my life, I had a trustworthy and steady supply of all the basic necessities that an up-and-coming psychonaut would ever need. All it took was a small chunk of change and a quick phone call to my plug, and I was the proud owner of some of the most mind-altering substances known to man. Obtaining the acid was easy enough. However, this time it came with a warning. My dealer told me that this was some of the strongest acid he had ever tried. He then told me that the blotters were double-dosed, being somewhat experienced, or so I thought. I thanked him for his time and shrugged off his suggestion for taking a smaller dose to start off with. Of course, first mistake is ignoring his dealer's advice. He clearly took a high dose and double-dosed. With acid generally being 100 micrograms, double-dosed potentially means each one was 200 micrograms each. Of course, you never know for sure because some tabs start at 200 or 300, but the average would be 100. After I made the purchase, I made my way over to my friend's apartment. I'll call him C for anonymity. Once I arrived at C's apartment, I greeted my other friends D and sat on the couch. The plan was to wait for C to get off work so that all three of us could trip together. Other players that night included C's sisters A as well as her boyfriend B and D's brother E, as well as E's girlfriend J. However, D and I were the only ones at the apartment at the time. After about an hour of playing video games, E and J arrived at the apartment and informed us that C wouldn't be getting home until late in the evening because he had to work and stay late, so D and I decided to dose early. We both dropped 3 blotters each under our tongues and sat back to wait for the effects to kick in. Generally, people put LSD under their tongue because it allows it to absorb sublingually, which means it hits faster. While I had tripped several times on acid prior to this, D and I only had done it twice at this point. The most I'd ever done up until this was 2 tabs, so I remember being slightly nervous. And assuming he took 2 tabs of regularly dosed acid, that would have only been 200 micrograms, which assuming his were 200 now, yeah, that was like half of one of these. I'd also like to point out what he's already missed is testing his blotters. You'll want to test everything before you ingest it with the Ehrlich reagent. What you do is cut a corner off the side, drip a drop of this stuff on there. If it turns purple, it means you're positive for an indole alkaloid. With counterfeit blotters going around, such as NBME compounds, which can be deadly with as much as 2 tabs, it is of the utmost importance to test your tabs regardless of what your dealer says, so you already messed up on the safety there. The first thing that I noticed was the tapestry on the wall. This tapestry was something that I'd never paid much attention to prior to this experience. It was an extremely vivid psychedelic artwork containing multiple tie-dye colors, fractal geometry shapes, and symbols. While I was staring at the tapestry, I noticed the symbols began to breathe with the music, almost as if they were floating on the sound waves like a boat bobbing up and down in the middle of the ocean. The fractal shapes were popping out at me like I was in an IMAX theater wearing 3D glasses. The thing that bothered me at the time was that it had only been 10 minutes since we dropped. Yeah, when it hits this fast, it means you are in for a ride. It means that it was some strong shit. I knew one thing at that very moment, and it was that the acid we had just taken was stronger than anything I had ever taken before. Usually it takes around 45 minutes for the come-up to start. However, this time it was happening much faster and stronger. I repeated to myself the age-old mantra that I had been told the very first time I ever tripped. Ride the dragon, man. And that's what I did. Everything was going fine. I was slowly getting higher, more confused, and more visuals, and that was to be expected. However, shortly after I'd acclimated myself to the initial phase of the come-up, our dynamic, and as a result, the atmosphere changed. E and J looked at me and D told us that they had to leave. It had only been 30 minutes since we had dropped. E and J had an emergency, so they had to leave us behind to go take care of their situation. I instantly felt a pit in my stomach. I had been told only a few minutes prior to this that C and A would not be off work until 10 o'clock that evening, which meant that D and I would have to be by ourselves for the next 4 hours until they got home. Now, I'm not sure why this is such a big deal. I mean, he's not alone. This would be much more hectic if he was just left by himself all of a sudden, but at least he's got someone with him. The time it took for E and J to back their belongings and leave took around 2 minutes. However, to me, it felt like an hour had passed. I remember thinking to myself that time was already starting to become irrelevant and it had only been 35 minutes since we had put the blotters on our tongues. My anxiety continued to increase even after E&J had left. Meanwhile, D was sitting playing on his phone, or so I thought. Yes, electronic devices can morph into a very strange interface that feels nearly impossible to manage. I asked D if I could change the music since he was playing it on his phone. He obliged and handed me the phone so that I could change the song. My visuals were so intense at this point that nothing in the room looked familiar. It looked like I had just traveled through a wormhole to an alternate dimension where everything was a weird shape or color. My open-eye visuals consisted of millions of spirals and buzzsaw fractals, as well as the constant morphing of everything in my vision. I quickly realized that I had no way of deciphering the alien piece of technology, that's what I said, that I was holding, and I could only press random buttons on the screen, not knowing what I was doing. This is when you know you're in for a ride. I looked over to my friend and realized that he had been watching me frantically typing away on his phone lock screen for several minutes, never attempting to ask him what the password was. I can only imagine what was going through his head at the time. I didn't care though. To me, he just looked like an alien or an NPC in a video game. Nothing about him looked familiar to me. Deep down though, some part of me knew that he was still my friend, even though he looked nothing like the D I once knew. Barely remembering how to speak the English, I asked him how he was doing. He then replied, to this day, the most terrifying thing that anyone has ever said to me in my entire life. He replied,
"This is fine."
The next couple of hours are blurry, and I am still struggling to piece together my memory of the events that took place during this time. However, I do remember one thing. I remember my friend repeating the phrase, "This is fine. This is fine." And it reminds me of that cartoon with the dog, where like the house lights up and he's sitting in there and he's on fire, and I think he's just like, "This is fine." I was so high that the words held no meaning to me. However, just the sound of his voice and the utterance of that phrase were driving me to insanity. My visuals were so overwhelmingly intense that I couldn't even see what was right in front of me. However, they were moving in sync with his voice and his repetition of the phrase, "This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine." I think that he was just as freaked out, if not more than I was at the time, but I could not handle what he was saying to me. I turned the volume on the TV to the max and tried to focus on what was going on, but everything on the TV just looked like as foreign of an alien as the world around me. Still, through the blaring sound of the TV, I could hear my friend screaming at the top of his lungs, "This is fine! This is fine! This is fine!" This went on for a few minutes until I finally snapped and ran to the bathroom for some respite. After getting lost in my own eyes and thoughts in the mirror, I decided to take a shower. For my entire life, hot showers have always calmed me down when I'm having an anxiety attack, and the feeling of the warm water over my face helped a little bit. But I could still faintly hear my friend in the background repeating the same phrase. At this point, I couldn't understand English, so he could have been saying anything, but deep down I knew that he was still repeating the same thing over and over again. I remember looking at the falling droplets of water and being able to control and predict their paths of movement with my mind. My memory is fuzzy, but I believe that I could control the temperature of the water with my mind as well, almost as if I had some slight form of telekinesis. I dried off and ran to the living room after my shower, only to find D in the same spot I had left him. He was still repeating the same phrase. However, this time his mouth wasn't moving. "This is fine! This is fine! This is fine!" This truly has to be the most existential dread I have ever experienced in my entire life. Since this experience, I have had conversations with DMT jesters and aliens, met the mushroom gods on multiple occasions. However, seeing my friend communicate to me with his mind while staring into my soul was truly more terrifying than anything else I had ever experienced. I collapsed to the floor and accepted my eternal fate. In my mind, I was in hell, and this was my punishment for all the sins I had committed throughout my entire life. Then, with my eyes closed on the floor, I began to descend into my first true ego death. The light of my life began to fade away and was replaced by the singularity of a black hole, a fourth-dimensional geometric mass moving in tandem to the rhythm of the phrase, "This is fine, this 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 is fine." I did not know the meaning. I just understood the vibrations of what was being shown to me. It looked like a truly unrecognizable shape, something that no human could ever hope to comprehend. It moved in ways I could never describe with words, and then suddenly it vanished. After it left, I was alone. I was nothing and everything at the same time. I understood somehow that I was truly alone, and that everything in my life, even though I couldn't remember what life was a lie. Feels like my life lately. I experienced the most truly, utterly terrifying, horrible dread any human being could ever hope to experience in their entire life. An infinity of aloneness, and infinity of nothingness. There was no one else, only me. I was all and everything and nothing at the same time. So there's two ways that you can view this experience. This experience can be one of absolute bliss. It can be joyous. You can realize just how expansive and beautiful you are as everything and nothing all at the same time. But if you're going into this blind, not knowing what to expect, it is pure and utter hell. Oh my God, this is so fucking long. Then I decided, because I was God, I decided I did not want to be God. So then it was, and I was no longer God. Slowly, I reversed my way through the black hole and out of the infinite geometries of the other dimension and progressed back into the reality of our universe. I made my way through our galaxy, then to our solar system, then onto this planet Earth, and arrived back into the C's apartment, writhing on the ground, bawling my eyes out. It was only then that I looked up and realized that D, A, B, and C were all standing over me looking like they had just seen a ghost. To me, they looked like aliens, so the feeling was mutual. My visuals were just as intense as they were before, but I was at least back on planet Earth. So I was thankful for that. I was not out of the woods yet, though, not by a long shot. C and B asked me how I was doing, but I had no idea what they were saying. It sounded to me like they were speaking another language made up of strange robotic noises. I remember barely understanding them when they had asked me if I wanted one of the trip killers that I had brought with me that evening. Well, this is smart. A trip killer is a benzodiazepine, and it's pretty much what they would give to you if you arrived at the emergency room presenting features of insanity, psychosis, a bad trip. At the time, I was prescribed trazodone, and while I had never taken it while tripping, I knew that it would be successful in bringing me back to reality. This unfortunately would never come to fruition. I was right at the beginning of my peak, and I was in an extreme state of mental distress. While B handed me the pill, I put it in my mouth with a sip of Gatorade. The first thing I remember is a tingling sensation in my mouth. In my altered state of confusion, I mistook this feeling for impending death. I was under the impression at the time that the medicine they had given me was poison, so I spat it out and realized the truth. I was the only living being in the entire universe. All of my friends and family were just NPCs in the giant simulation. Now that I had become self-aware, they were trying to kill me to reset the timeline. This is what I truly believed at the time. Instantly, my fight-or-flight response kicked in. I'd like to believe that this is where the true trip really began. Not with the ego death I experienced prior to this, but with the sense of dread in knowing that everyone in the world was coming after me with the sole intention of killing me. It sounds crazy, but I've had the same thing. For some reason, when you're in this terror, you think that all your friends want to fucking kill you. I looked at the faces of my friends and I saw their evil, demonic expressions, almost as if they had realized I had found out the truth and were no longer trying to hide it. I ran out of the house, pushing past everyone around me, and took off into the cold, dark night wearing nothing but my basketball shorts. I was 6'3" and 280 pounds at the time, so there was no way that any of them would have been able to stop me. I ran into the parking lot screaming at the top of my lungs, but deep down I knew that my screams would fall on deaf ears. I yelled, "They're trying to kill me!" over and over. I felt no pain from my feet, even though I was running over shards of glass and sharp rocks on the ground. Oh gosh. I had never run so fast in my entire life. I was tackled in the middle of the road by B, the other man in the group of comparable size to me. He was begging me to return to the house, but I would not accept my fate so easily. I scratched and clawed at his face. Sounds like a cat. Until he let go of me and I began to run into the middle of oncoming traffic. Oh no. The cars all looked like alien spacecraft orbiting around a galactic highway. My friends, still in my pursuit, waved down the traffic so that they would not hit me. Many people got out of their cars and asked me what was going on, but I was writhing on the ground in the middle of the road. I assume many people called the police and paramedics, but I didn't stick around long enough to find out. I did, however, find out later that my friends maintained their story to anyone that asked that I was schizophrenic and was suffering from a severe mental outburst. I mean, that's what it can look like. When they first discovered psychedelics, they thought that it was an insight into seeing the schizophrenic's mind. Like they thought taking it would immerse you in a brief state of schizophrenia, insanity, and they wanted to study, the differences between the sober state and being schizophrenic. I ran out from the road back into the apartment and complex where I was met with A, C's sister. I fell to the ground and assumed the meditative position that I had seen most Buddha statues in my life. In my head, I was the one true entity. I was God, and my powers were returning to me. I began speaking in tongues and channeling the power that I'd forgotten so that I could evade those who were pursuing me. A approached me slowly, trying to calm me down, but as soon as he got close enough to touch me, I sprang out like a stray cat and ran in the other direction. I knew that I was the fastest being in the universe, and I ran into the forest surrounding C's apartment. This was the last time that any of my friends would see me for many hours. I stumbled through the forest, having profound realizations of reality and nature. I met with myself from previous lives and talked with the most profound scholars in history. I met with Jesus himself, and he only maintained that I was Jesus in another life. I met with Shakespeare, who told me that love was the meaning to everything in existence, and then I met with Dylan Thomas, who told me not to go gentle into that good night. Oh shit. I was in an enchanted forest surrounded by dead prophets and mystics, and I begged them to stop giving me profound knowledge about the universe. I bargained with whoever was listening that I might return to my life as a normal human being, unaware of the existentialism of ego death. I knew then that there was only one way to make this terrible evening end. Oh my gosh, it's going to contemplate suicide. When you're in this state, I've been there, you can actually believe, and this is the most terrifying thought that you can have, that you're in some kind of alternate dimension, and the only way to wake up from the dream is to die. Yep, one of the biggest dangers of psychedelics right there. A wall had been built to separate the dirt from entering the parking lot. However, the wall did not go any higher than the ground level on the side of the forest. I walked towards the wall, listening to all the voices in my head telling me not to go any further. However, I ignored them, and I plummeted face first into the pavement. I woke up, surrounded by a pool of crimson red liquid. Oh great, blood. And felt the most excruciating pain I had ever felt in my life. I have no memory of the fall, but I do remember waking up on the pavement. It was now around midnight, so there was no one else in the parking lot. I writhed on the ground and experienced what I can only describe as hell. I went through every life I've ever lived. However, the only thing I experienced was the death that I had gone through for that life. I died a billion different ways. Even though it was only a hallucination, I felt pain of being burned alive and crucified on a cross. I felt the pain of starving to death and being shot in the back or stabbed. This went on for an eternity, and it felt more real than reality itself. I am not sure how long I was on that pavement, but I remember seeing Jesus standing over me. I asked him why I was going through all of this, and he replied, "You already went through this. You're just remembering your past lives. In order to truly appreciate the life you're living now, you have to understand the suffering of those who came before you." After he spoke to me, I realized that he was me, and I was him. I was everyone, and the pain and suffering I inflicted on others was ultimately just reflected back onto myself. Well, this is very eye-opening. I have had this exact same experience. It's like where you realize you have an experience where someone's killing you, and you're both the one dying and the one doing the killing, and then you wake up in laughter, and you're like, oh my God, it's all me. And then you feel so stupid for being cruel to other people. I then had a complete change in my mental state. I felt the pure love of all my past lives. I experienced all of the relationships I had ever developed with myself over the millions of years, and the pure love of the universe. I realized that in order for love to have any meaning, I would need something to compare it to. Oh, welcome to duality. The reason for suffering is so that love holds much more value. I mean, that's true. I stood and realized that I had only suffered bruises to my arms and legs, as well as a broken nose where the blood was coming from. I was lucky to have survived, or at least not broken anything on my fall. I was beginning at this point to sober up and stared at the stars, and I could control them with my mind. I could wave my hands in the sky, and entire galaxies would flow like the ingredients of a galactic soup. I was happier than I had ever been. Realizing that I had created something as beautiful as the universe, I then met with complex entities that I could only describe as stereotypical gray aliens. They brought me aboard their ship and told me that they were going to fix my wounds. They told me that they had been watching me and they didn't want me to have any permanent injuries because of this experience. I thanked them after they did their operations, and they returned me to the same parking lot where they had found me. Wow. That's pretty cool, man. I mean, I've thought I've met aliens too. It's amazing how a lot of our trips that go this deep have so many similarities. Like, I've thought I was dying a million ways. I thought I was with the aliens. This is wild. After this, I stood on my feet and somehow I walked back to my friend's apartment complex. I found his apartment and I climbed through the back sliding glass door. This is something that I would do on a regular basis, and I basically lived with him, but I did not have a key to his apartment. And I went to his bathroom to take a shower. In the shower, I washed the blood and dirt off every part of my body. I felt much better than I had been prior to this. However, I was still tripping extremely hard. I played with the water droplets again, and I found that I can control them with my mind even more than I could in the early evening. I then fell back into another hallucination. Although it felt more like a daydream, this time it was of a man and I was just a child. He would beat me and I would come to the shower to cry, and I realized it was repressed memory from my childhood. Oh shit. The horrible man was my father. I had forgotten all the times he had beaten me growing up, and the experience of being in the shower had unlocked those memories. This is huge. Psychedelics can unlock blocked trauma from our past, which is why taking doses this high is best met with a counselor or therapist so you can work through these with someone who specializes in healing trauma. But it is just a testimonial to how strong these experiences can be. It was right then that the sun started to come up. I had been in the shower for God knows how long when I remembered that cell phones existed, and I had somehow not lost mine in all the commotion of the night prior. I looked and saw at least 100 missed calls from my brother. Shit. Friends and some restricted numbers which I can only assume were the police or emergency services. I was confused why they were all calling me when I was clearly safe in my friend's apartment. Oh no. When I realized that I was not in fact in his apartment and in a random apartment that just happened to be unlocked. I freaked out and got dressed and still sopping wet because I didn't have a towel, ran out of the apartment. That's terrifying. When I went through one of my psychoses, which was very similar to this, I thought that I was trying to get back into the house, and I was actually slamming on the houses of strangers. And I remember this old couple answered, and I felt so bad. I was like, oh my God. Yeah, this can definitely happen to anybody. I ran all the way back to my friend's apartment and knocked on the door. He opened and nearly cried when he saw me. My friends at the time were closer to me than my actual family, with the exclusion of my brother, so they were all extremely relieved to see me. I went inside and gave them all hugs and apologized profusely. I was still tripping, but the effects were extremely mellow compared to before. I had been tripping now for 15 hours, and I was ready to sleep, so C let me change into an extra set of clothes he had and let me sleep in his bed for the next 8 hours. When I woke up, my memories from the night before were extremely cloudy, but my friends filled me in on some of the details. I found out that emergency services and police were called, and they were all out looking for me for hours. However, none of my friends gave the police my real name or contact information, so I was extremely thankful for that. I was debating whether or not to go to the hospital, but in reality, my injuries were only a broken nose, cut up feet, knees, and wrists, so I decided against it. I thought the aliens fixed him. When my friends asked me to recount what had happened, I truly could not. Every time I tried to tell them, my words would not work, and I became extremely anxious. I had PTSD from this experience for many years after. However, in the past year, I've been able to work through what I learned, and I now view it as having a positive impact on my life. And he was 18 at the time of this experience. Holy shit. He's male, 2019. Published 2022. Wow, that is one hell of a fucking story, man. What did he do wrong? Didn't test his tabs, took way too much, and clearly his environment wasn't set up properly. It does not look like they had a designated trip sitter. Which, granted, in this situation, the trip sitter would have had to have been someone bigger than him, which isn't always a plausible thing to find. Even if he had a trip sitter, he would have just bulldozed and cat scratched their face and, charged right out. This is an instance where it's like, they probably should have had like a whole bowl of benzodiazepines on the table, maybe diluted in liquid, so that you could trick him into drinking some. Because I've had this exact same thing where I spit out the benzos. The time when my friends were headlocking me because they thought I was going to run into traffic, I was spitting out the benzos because I thought I was getting poisoned. It's amazing how many similarities my experiences have had with this experience, which tells me that this is a regular occurrence with too high doses of acid. Besides that, he did everything wrong. He tried to kill himself. Okay, that's obviously wrong. He ran into traffic. The real question is, how could he even been more safe? And the real answer is he should have not taken that much. It's that simple. That was way too high a dose for where he was mentally at the time and with the parameters they had set for their trip. Yeah, he also should have tested it. And overall, this is shocking that he ended up being okay. It's amazing that he's okay, but this could have he could have got hit by a car. He could have successfully died. Thank God for those aliens who resurrected him. Oh, this is a terrifying story. And I'm sure listening to this, he was also too young. 18 is way too young to be dosing that high. The PTSD is real. Some people can leave these experiences with latent mental illnesses exacerbated and brought out to the surface, such as schizophrenia. Anyway, horrifying story. I'm so happy that he was okay in the end. And this is really just a good example of what not to do and why you should always dose slow. And if you are wanting to dose higher, just dose slightly higher than last time. It doesn't rise in a linear way, the potency. It can go like 1 tab's like this and 2 are like this. So you got to be careful. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, leave it a like, subscribe to the channel, pick up one of our hooded trip blankets. We still have some stock available. Head on over to psychsubstance.shop, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Take care.